Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the Telemedia Fortnightly podcast, where we unpack the news and views that have come across our site, across my desk in the past 14 days. I'm Paul Skeldon, I'm the editor-in-chief at Telemedia. And I have to say it's been quite quiet on my desk with Mobile World Congress, less than a month away now. Everyone's obviously sitting on and holding back on all their really interesting stuff so they can have a big old splurge in the run-up to and at the show. However, that doesn't mean there isn't anything to talk about. And I think Mobile World Congress is a sort of good focal point for everyone in the industry. I know we run our own Telemedia 8.1 live event around it. That's taking place on the Monday in Barcelona. But I think it does concentrate people's minds on sort of some of the key things that are coming up for the year ahead, and there are some quite interesting developments in the telecom space, the broad telecom space, as well as in telemedia, and they do have quite an impact on what the companies that we all deal with in the telemedia space are doing. So I thought this week, in the absence of much in the way of hard news, we would unpack some of the things that I think are going to be interesting talking points, both at Mobile World Congress and at the 8.1 live event that is happening on the Monday. The first thing really is networks, 5G particularly, even a bit of 6G. There's going to be a lot of stuff at Mobile World Congress about 5G. It's really coming into its own now. Its deployment is there. It's not ubiquitous yet, but it's there enough that people are familiar with it and using it. As I talked about in the last podcast we did 2 weeks ago, there's the sort of 5G Advanced and 5G RedCap, the different sort of capabilities of 5G being used in different ways. And I think what we're going to see a lot about at Mobile World Congress is the ability of 5G networks to put the intelligence out on the outside of the network, at the edge of the network. And that, I think, leads to all sorts of interesting services, like content streaming services for one, but also like building in all the AI-based intelligence stuff that consumers and businesses are going to, we're all starting to rely on it. We don't even really realise that we're doing it, I don't think, to some extent. So you're going to see a lot more of that being built in to the network. We're also going to see a lot of AI running and optimising networks and creating sort of the services that are on there, the customer service that goes with it. There's an awful lot around that. And I think a lot of where that intelligence sits within a network and how 5G is being used is already starting to shape how people in the industry are starting to talk about 6G. Seems awfully premature, but they are already talking about 6G. And there are some sessions at Mobile World Congress outlining the sort of beginnings of the framework for what 6G might look like, which is great. I mean, obviously, these things do keep evolving, and the needs of the network and the needs of the people using it evolve with them. That's fine. I think one of the bigger issues, which I guess will probably come up in debate, particularly among the network operators, is that the sort of evolution period now between 5 and 6G and then 7G is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and no one's got any time really to make any sort of return on the investment they're making in 5G. I think there's many that have made a return on the investment on 4G, probably even some on 3G. So I think there is this issue that the sort of capability and the want is running away from what's actually sort of financially feasible. But I think that's going to be an interesting sort of counterpoint to here's all the great things we could do with 5G and possibly 6G. Hang on a minute, how do we pay for all of this? So I think there's going to be some discussion about that. I think in the 8.1 forum, we're going to see a lot of talk about how 5G capabilities can be exploited by VAS providers and messaging providers. And I think we're going to see a growth in sort of more interesting services. We've already seen Sam Media's Holozonia and their foray into the metaverse, but I think we're going to start to see more of that kind of thing, and some interesting ones I probably haven't even thought of yet. So I think that we're going to see some interesting G-based stuff out there. AI obviously is probably the biggest talking point at both Mobile World Congress and 8.1 this year. I think it's everywhere, from the intelligent network routing to fraud, combating fraud, to creating content, to creating customer services, to creating the sort of understanding billing, understanding the data that's gathered and how things are marketed, it encompasses absolutely everything, and it's everywhere. It pervades everything. I think it's still going to be talked about. I think this is probably the last year we will actually talk about AI as a thing. I think from now on in, it's just a given that it's part of everything that we do. We don't even sort of really realise that we're using it a lot of the time. And I think, everything that in the telemedia space is going to have some sort of AI powered in it somewhere, particularly around sort of understanding, digesting, segmenting, and using the data that can be gathered from all this. I think that's something that's going to become increasingly important. So I'll come to about some of the other sort of topics later on. AI and its data analytical and data segmentation and content creation together provides a really powerful offering for many companies, a really real money spinner, but we'll come to that in a minute. I think one of the downsides of it is it does raise questions about veracity, keeping content sort of like, fakes, I guess. We're talking deep fakes and all sorts of other fakes and frauds. It's particularly in 2024, there's a lot of elections happening around the world. I think we're going to see AI playing a role in creating all sorts of nebulous and spurious information around that. And I think it's also going to play a really big role, an even bigger role than it already does in fraud and cyber security. We're seeing a rise in cybercrime. A guy from IBM I was talking to, if you read last week's editorial from the newsletter, he says it's like an industrial process now, cybercrime, and it's been enabled by AI, which just means they can just hit so much more and do it so much more efficiently. From a criminal point of view, it's really aided customer acquisition, i.e. victims. So I think to be an increasingly large talking point. I think we're going to see a lot of 8.1 in particular about how AI is being used to combat AI fraud, particularly around carrier billing. I think we're going to see its use increasing in how it combats messaging fraud and volume fraud and phishing scams, as well as how it creates them. And I think we are in an interesting phase of the battle between cyber criminals and cyber security, where they're both using the same technology and they're both having huge wins because of it. But it's really the sort of outranking each other is increasing in pace and scope. And I think the more we see in terms of connectivity, the more services become, obviously, there's a bigger opportunity for fraud. And so I think it's an interesting time for that. I think we're also going to see everything being connected. That's another part of this. I think IoT, the Internet of Things, remember that, is going to increasingly become not just a reality, but like AI, a sort of background fact of life. We won't talk about it. Everything will be connected. Lots of things already are. I think sort of the scope of 5G RedCap and the use of spectrum from previous Gs, 4 and 3, is going to connect billions of devices to the network, to each other, people to them also. And I think, again, it offers all manner of possibilities and opportunities for creating new services and new businesses and new business models. Also does throw open, of course, everything to cybercrime. So I think, again, we circle back to that. But it is a big issue, and I think it is going to be a year 2024 of cybercrime and fraud. And I think it's not necessarily just cyber criminals winning. I think there's going to be some major gains in how it's fought. But I think this interconnectedness, this rollout of AI, this rollout of much more encompassing and embracing services is it opens up to more risk. And I think battling that is going to be quite difficult. And I think we're going to see a lot of that talked about at Mobile World Congress and at 8.1. Now, all the other things, of course, I don't want to sort of dwell too much on things like messaging and payments and content, because I talk about those all the time. I think we're in danger of me just like repeating myself. But I think we are going to see at both 8.1 and at Mobile World Congress a lot of talk about RCS, obviously. I think what's more interesting, because we've already seen and heard all the potential of RCS, it now may start to become more of a reality now that Apple is going to join in towards the end of 2024, admittedly, but is now playing. I think what's more interesting is what it means for rich business messaging generally, as to where things like WhatsApp go, where the use of social media direct messaging goes, those sorts of things. Because I think there's a whole sort of panoply of potential there for not just to use sort of RCS to deliver sort of iMessage like things on all phones, but to how to make all that much richer and how it becomes transactional. And I think, again, combined with AI and its role in creating sort of segmented markets and segmented data and content and offers, we're going to start to see some really interesting and super personalized offers that are sent out through messaging that are clickable and payable. I think that's going to be an interesting development for carrier billing. I think it's going to play a sort of a much bigger role within how these interactive and rich messages that are very specifically targeted are shoppable. It won't be the only way to pay, but I think it will be a kind of fairly quick and unique way of doing it. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that, building on all the things we saw at the end of last year with the rise of companies like Internet Q in Germany becoming sort of a payment provider, and the potential ability for carrier billing to be used to pay for physical goods. And I think it's a bit away. It's not there yet, but the theory is there. We just need to see it in practice. And I think all these other elements, particularly the messaging and also the AI sort of analysis and breakdown of data and the personalization of the content it can create for that sort of business messaging, is a very interesting space. And I think we're going to hear a lot about that out there. I think similarly, this role of AI in segmenting data is starting to really have an impact on marketing and promotion. I think we're already seeing the end of cookies, as we all know. I mean, it's a dying art. Nobody really wants it. Nobody wants the sort of accept, reject cookie doodah that comes up every time you go on any website. An utter fail in terms of customer sort of user interface. But I think it's kicked the marketing industry into a very different phase of what it does with data. Now, I think these days, cookie data, I say, is on the wane. First-party data, that retailers and merchants have first-party customer data suddenly are sitting on a really, really valuable asset. And I think we're starting to see the rise of this, particularly in the retail sector, this idea of retail media networks, where retailers who have, big retailers in particular, have a lot of first-party data about their customers, like really good, data. They know who they are, where they are, what they like, what they buy, when, how, which channel they use, what messaging they respond to, what they don't, all of that sort of thing. Combine that with AI that can segment and analyze and group in all sorts of different ways, that data suddenly becomes an extremely valuable asset. And some retailers are starting to use that as a way of selling essentially ad space on their websites. And that, I think, is not just something that's going to be limited to the retail world. That's going to be something that's limited to any kind of website that has good first-party access to particular demographics of people in a market where there are brands trying to reach them. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So the sort of sponsored search idea is going to appear on more websites. It's not just going to be where, when you Google. And I think people are going to move away from just Googling stuff, which they already are, because one of the biggest changes in marketing, I think, is this idea that we're not sort of doing keyword-based searching. You're not typing in sort of generic stuff. People are typing in really specific requests. Best sunglasses to wear for playing golf in the Caribbean. Something really, really niche, very specific, and it's getting an answer because generative AI is starting to feed out the results to these things, not the search engines. Or rather, the search engines are being interrogated in a very different way and having to sort of repurpose their data. And I think that's a really fundamental sort of shift in the marketing and promotion side of services and content in the telemedia sector. And indeed, at 8.1, Google are talking there about marketing funnels and how to sort of capitalize on this in this sort of world where SEO is no longer really as relevant, or indeed to some degrees there as it once was. It's a different way of reaching people, and you have to set yourself up differently to achieve that. And that applies to everybody who's trying to be found on the internet. And that's a B2B thing as well as a B2C issue. So I think that's going to be something that's really interesting that we're going to see a lot of. And a lot of talk around on the periphery of all the networky stuff at Mobile World Congress, but particularly at Telemedia 8.1 Live, where we can talk about these sorts of very specific content and content marketing issues. Which brings me finally to the final thing I think that's interesting to look out for at both Mobile World Congress and 8.1 is content. We talked a lot in Marbella about the changing world of content. A lot of it's video stuff, and it's a huge mixture of long, medium, and short form. It can be very niche, it can be very general. It's everything, and it's everywhere. And there is this issue that how do I run a content service that's video based and compete against the big five streaming giants, the Netflix, the Hulus, the Primes, those sorts of people? And I think the thing is, what we're starting to learn is that you don't have to compete with them. Again, with better segmented data, better understanding of who the customers are, and a better database and some access to AI that can help you tweak the content you want, you can start to create a very lucrative content service, long form, medium form, short form, however you want to do it, that does hit the right niches. It's a niche thing, but it's part of that huge long tail, and there's a lot of money always to be made from the long tail. So I think we're going to see an awful lot about that, and I know for a fact that we will be talking about it at the show. We'll also have a very special guest in 2 weeks' time on the next podcast here from Telemedia, who will also help us unpack what that actually means. So that's something to look forward to in the coming weeks. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour, in a nutshell view, I think, some of the key topics. We could go on forever about it, but I think the fundamental things is networks are getting better and faster, and AI is much better at analysing data and creating things around what that data says and finding the right people to market stuff to. And that has a huge impact on messaging, which has a huge impact on payments, which all has a huge impact on operators, service providers, aggregators, and telemedia companies. So I guess it boils down to those two big things: better networks, lots of AI, but it has a huge potential to change the market we work in and the kind of companies that, or the things that the companies we deal with are doing. So exciting times. Look forward to meeting all those people, talking about it all out in Barcelona, and hopefully getting a bit of sunshine. And we'll meet again before then. Special guests, I say, in the next one to talk about content issues, and look forward to seeing you then. So take care and speak soon.